Hello friends, this video on neural control and coordination part 15 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So now by this time you should understand all about neurons. So you should be clear with the structure of the neuron, the way they do their job. So everything should be clear about neuron. But the question is nervous system all about neurons only? For example, initially in the very first few slides, I gave you examples of a person touching a hot cup of coffee and then immediately taking his hand back. So in that case, I told that it is the brain who is sending the information or sending the instruction to the muscle cells to behave like that. So by now we discussed only neurons, that how neurons will carry that information which the sensory organs have experienced to the brain. But what about brain? What does the brain do? So what are the other parts of the nervous system? Neurons alone will not be able to do the job. So you need some parts in the nervous system which can think, which can actually instruct, which can actually interpret things. So neurons will only help in conduction. They will only help to carry the information from one part to another. But who is actually the deciding, who actually has the deciding power? So for that we will have to talk about the other parts of the nervous system. So let us now understand the different types of nervous system present in human beings. The entire nervous system in human beings, that is divided into two types. So let us talk about the types of nervous system. Now in humans, the nervous system is divided into two broad types. The first is the central nervous system, which is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. So brain and spinal cord forms the central nervous system, and the next one is the peripheral nervous system, which is often abbreviated as PNS, and it is composed of all the nerves which connects the central nervous system to all other parts of the body. So there are basically two types of nerves which form the peripheral nervous system, that is the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. So cranial nerves because it is derived from the word cranium, which is a part of the brain. Spinal nerves from the word spinal cord. So these nerves are associated with brain and spinal cord. That is, they are associated with the central nervous system. So the nerves of the peripheral nervous system will actually connect the brain and spinal cord to rest of the body. So now we will try to understand these parts of the nervous system in detail. That is, what is the structure of the brain, what is the function of the brain, and how does it work. Similarly, we'll talk about the spinal cord also and the peripheral nerves. So let us start our discussion with brain. So let us talk about brain now. Brain is the coordinating center of the body. So the master control, you can say. The entire control is in the hands of brain. So anything and everything that we do is decided by the brain. Let us take a very simple example. Now, suppose you are appearing for your exams. This is how the brain looks like. Just have a look at it. It is so complex, my God. Right? So we will talk about the different structures and the different small parts of the brain in detail. This brain is made up of around 10,000 million neurons. Just imagine the number of neurons present in the brain. There are these many neurons present there. Now, as I said, whatever we do is decided by the brain, which weighs around 1.3 kg. So it is not that heavy, but at the same time, yes, all your intelligence, all your memory, all your thinking power, everything is situated in the brain. Let us take a very simple example. Suppose you are appearing for your exams. So you look at your question paper and then you write the answer. So how do you write the answer? When you read the question, you think about the answer, that what should be the right answer. So who thinks it for you? It is your brain who thinks it. So inside your brain there are certain centers. So there is one center which is for vision. Vision in the sense it is your eyes which sees something, but it is your brain which interprets what are you seeing. For example, you see an object. You just see that object. An image of that object is formed on the retina of your eye. But how do you know if that object which you are seeing is a pen, or it is an animal, or it is a human being, or what it is? So that interpretation is done by the brain. Similarly, when you read the questions in your examination, your brain first interprets what is the question, the brain understands the question, and then the brain tells what should be the answer, and then that information is sent to the respective muscle cells so that they can do their job. So a lot of coordination is involved between many different organs, but the decision control is with the brain. So the brain is the one who decides. So let us try to understand the structure of the human brain. So we will try to simplify and then try to understand what is the brain made up of. First of all, the covering of the brain. Now, brain being such a critical thing in our body, it needs to be well protected, and for that purpose, it has a covering of the skull. So the skull is a bony structure that ensures protection to the brain. So bony structure, the bones are hard and rigid enough to provide good protection. So that is the skull. So here you can see this covering of the brain. This thing which you see, that is the skull. So we already discussed about the bones which form the skull, right? The cranial bones and the facial bones. So we discussed all that in the previous lesson. Now, the skull houses the brain and also the sensory structures. For example, the eyes, ears, nose, they are also located in the skull. So the skull can be divided into two parts, that is the cranium and the mandible. So which is the cranium? This portion is the cranium, and the front portion, or this portion, is considered as mandible. So this part is mandible and this portion is cranium. It is made up of total 22 bones, out of which 8 are cranial bones and 14 are facial bones. So the facial bones are present somewhere here and the cranial bones are present somewhere here. Now I am not going to discuss about the cranial and the facial bones again because I have already discussed them in the previous lesson. So if you want to know more about them, you can refer the lesson on locomotion and movement. Then the next thing about brain is the meninges. So what are meninges? These are 3 layers of protective tissue or membrane which cover the brain. So skull is the bony covering outside. Inside the skull there are 3 layers of tissues for additional protection to the brain. So what are these? And these 3 layered tissue are known as meninges. So what are the 3 layers? Let us have a look at the 3 layers. Okay. So what is the purpose? As I said, to ensure protection. Now what are those 3 layers? So the 3 layers are dura mater. So these are the 3 layers: dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. So these are the 3 layers of the meninges. So dura mater is the outermost layer, that is this layer, the green colored layer, that is the dura mater. The next layer is the arachnoid, that is the middle layer, which is yellow in color, and the innermost layer is the pia mater. So from here this pink color starts. So that is the pia mater, and the outermost thing which is present here, this is the skull. Right? So the dura mater is the outermost, and pia mater is the innermost, and the arachnoid is a very thin middle layer. So if you see here also, the yellow colored layer is the thinnest one, and this pia mater, that is the innermost layer, is in contact with the brain tissue. So these are the tissues of the brain. So the pia mater is directly in touch with the brain tissues. Right? So these are the meninges. Next are the brain ventricles. So what are brain ventricles? These are fluid-filled cavities which are present in the brain. Now, from where do these brain ventricles, from where are they formed? Now, in a baby, not even baby, in the embryo. So inside a pregnant woman's womb, when the embryo develops, there is a neural tube which develops. So that embryonic neural tube later becomes the brain ventricles in adults. So brain ventricles are those cavities which are filled with some fluid, and these are the site for production of the cerebrospinal fluid. That is the fluid which fills all the empty spaces or all the cavities inside the brain. So that fluid is formed actually at these brain ventricles. So if you look at this, you can actually see what are the brain ventricles. There are two lateral ventricles. There is a third ventricle and a fourth ventricle. So where are the ventricles? So here you can see these are the ventricles. So these are the ventricles. So how many ventricles do we have? So there are two lateral ventricles which are located laterally. There are two lateral ventricles. There is a third ventricle and a fourth ventricle. So these are the fluid filled cavities which are present. So just now these ventricles are seen in the forebrain and the brain stem. Now what is a forebrain and what is a brain stem? We will get to know a little later. We will talk about the parts of the brain, the overall parts of the brain. So let us talk about the fluid which fills all the empty spaces in the brain, that is known as the CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid. CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. This is the fluid which fills the space between the meninges and the ventricles. So all the empty spaces in between the meninges and the ventricles is filled by the cerebrospinal fluid, and it is produced in the brain ventricles. What is their function? It provides protection. How can it provide protection? Because if the empty spaces are filled with fluid, it actually provides a cushion-like or a pad-like protection to the internal tissues, and that is how it ensures protection. Secondly, it helps in buoyancy. What do you mean by buoyancy? Now the brain is being immersed in a fluid, the net weight is reduced. Now as I said that the weight of the brain is approximately 1.3 kgs. Now please try to remember the Archimedes principle on buoyancy, which says that when a body is immersed in a fluid, then the apparent weight of the body appears to be lesser than its actual weight, and that is because the apparent weight becomes equal to the actual weight minus the buoyant force. Because there is, whenever you immerse an object in a fluid, let us suppose there is a fluid and you immerse this object in the fluid. So what will happen? This object weight will be in the downward direction, but at the same time there will be a buoyant force acting in the upward direction. So this buoyant force will tend to reduce the actual weight of the body, and this buoyant force is actually equal to the weight of the fluid being displaced by this object. So let us suppose this much is the object. So it is actually trying to find space for itself by displacing some amount of fluid. So the weight of the fluid displaced will be equal to the buoyant force experienced by the object. So similar is the case with the brain. Brain is like that object which is immersed in a fluid, and that fluid is the cerebrospinal fluid. So as a result, the apparent weight of the brain gets reduced by some amount. Right? So that is another advantage of the presence of the cerebrospinal fluid. Next is excretion. Now, the cerebrospinal fluid has a speciality that it can flow unidirectionally. It has only one-way flow. So one-way flow of this fluid takes away all the wastes from the brain. So this fluid flows from the brain to the blood. So it carries away all the waste materials from the brain and throws it out into the blood, and then the blood will take it away and excrete it in the required way. So that is how it also helps in the process of excretion. Now these are the some of the important parts of the brain, and if you look at them, most of them, I mean, these are basically those parts of the brain which ensure protection to the brain. First of all, skull, which is a covering to ensure protection. Next is the meninges, which are again additional layers of tissues for additional protection. Third is the cerebrospinal fluid, which Again, since it is a fluid, it helps to give a cushion-like feeling, and that's how it provides protection. And the fourth is the brain ventricles, where the cerebrospinal fluid is produced. So we have discussed about all those parts of the brain which ensure protection of the brain. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.